No one expected the question to hit Jamie Dornan the way it did. He was sitting under bright studio lights during a casual interview, smiling politely as he always did. Then the host congratulated Dakota Johnson on her engagement, and everything in Jamie's expression changed. His smile froze, his eyes flickered, and for several long, unbearable seconds, he couldn't seem to speak. The silence was so heavy that even the audience felt it. The host tried to move on, but Jamie lifted a hand slightly as if to stop him. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, the kind of swallow that carried years of unsaid words. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped into something raw, something unguarded. "I'm happy for her," he began, then paused again, eyes drifting somewhere far away. The host nodded politely, waiting for a typical Hollywood answer. But Jamie didn't give one. His next words came out softer, almost whispered, "I just realized it too late." The room fell utterly silent, as if every molecule of air had been sucked out of it. Clips of that moment spread online within minutes. Fans replayed it obsessively, analyzing the tremor in Jamie's voice, the pain in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened as if he regretted letting the truth slip out. Every angle of the footage showed the same thing. A man struggling with a confession that had escaped him too suddenly. And behind the pain, there was something even more devastating: regret. Jamie tried to continue, but each sentence sounded heavier than the last. "Some things, some feelings, you don't realize until life makes the choice for you." The host blinked, unsure what to say, sensing he had stumbled into a moment that wasn't meant for cameras. Jamie looked down at his hands, as if seeing the truth written across his palms. "When I heard the news," he said slowly, "it hit me harder than I expected." His voice cracked just slightly, enough for fans to catch it, enough for the internet to explode. It wasn't a scandalous confession. It wasn't a declaration of forbidden love. It was worse. It sounded like heartbreak arriving too late. Back at the event where Dakota's engagement photos were being taken, she had no idea what Jamie had said. She was glowing, smiling with friends, posing with her ring. Then someone approached her with a phone, their face pale, whispering, "Dakota, you need to see this." She watched the clip without moving, her breath hitching as Jamie's voice filled the room. Dakota's smile faded instantly. As Jamie said, "I realized it too late," her eyes widened, then softened into something painfully sad. She whispered, "Why now?" barely loud enough for anyone to hear. According to a close friend, she stepped away from the group, walking toward a secluded corner, clutching her phone as if it might fall out of her shaking hands. For several minutes, she stood completely still, shoulders tense, jaw trembling, trying to process what she had just heard. Dakota was not someone who cried easily in public, but her eyes filled quickly, glassy and overwhelmed. "He shouldn't have said that," she murmured, voice cracking. "Not now, not anymore." Meanwhile, Hollywood exploded into chaos. Headlines screamed across every entertainment site. Jamie Dornan fails to hide his feelings about Dakota's engagement. Too late? Jamie's confession breaks the internet. Dakota shocked by Jamie's emotional slip. Fans dissected every second of the interview, convinced they'd witnessed the truth of a hidden love story. Some argued Jamie was hurting because he had finally admitted feelings he buried for years. Others insisted he was simply overwhelmed by nostalgia. But the most heartbreaking theory, the one that trended worldwide, was that Jamie had loved Dakota all along and spoke up only when it was too late. Body language experts were invited onto talk shows to analyze his reaction. They pointed out the way his voice softened only when speaking about Dakota, the way his eyes dropped to the floor in guilt, the way he paused before every important word. This wasn't scripted, one expert claimed. This was an emotional slip. A painful one. And still, Jamie remained quiet after the interview. No clarifying tweet, no statement, no denial. His silence felt like confirmation. For Dakota, the emotional impact was immediate and crushing. She had spent years building distance, closing chapters, moving on from a bond that had once been too close, too powerful, too dangerous. Hearing Jamie speak like that, on the very day she publicly celebrated a new beginning, felt like being pulled backward into a past she had worked so hard to escape. As the sun set that evening, both Jamie and Dakota found themselves alone in two different corners of Hollywood, bound by a confession neither expected and a timing neither could undo. And the world was left asking, what happens when love arrives not too little, but too late? Dakota Johnson tried to return to her engagement celebration, but nothing felt the same. The room was filled with laughter, congratulations, and warm embraces, but her mind was stuck on Jamie's trembling voice. Every time someone mentioned her fiancé, she forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Inside, she felt an ache she thought she had buried long ago, an ache Jamie's confession had ripped open in seconds. She slipped outside to breathe, wrapping her arms around herself as the cool night air touched her damp eyelashes. A friend followed her and whispered gently, "Dakota, talk to me." But Dakota only shook her head, staring at the city lights as if searching for clarity she knew she wouldn't find. "I didn't expect to feel this," she finally whispered. "Not after all these years." Meanwhile, Jamie's confession had become the center of Hollywood's universe. News outlets played the clip on repeat, dissecting every pause, every breath, every flicker of sadness in his eyes. Talk shows speculated that he had finally broken, letting out a truth he had suppressed too long. Even celebrities weighed in, some defending him, others calling his words selfish timing. That night, Jamie sat alone in his hotel room, the glow of his phone illuminating the darkness. Messages from his team begged him to clarify, to deny, to defuse the situation. But he couldn't bring himself to speak. Every time he closed his eyes, all he saw was Dakota, laughing with him years ago, crying beside him on difficult days, leaning on him during moments the world never saw. He whispered to himself, "I should have said it sooner." The words scraped against his throat like regret given form. He wasn't trying to ruin her happiness. He wasn't trying to intrude on her new life. He was simply a man who realized too late that some silences cost more than words ever could. Dakota's fiancé eventually found her on the balcony, his expression full of concern. "Is everything okay?" he asked softly. She stared at him for a long moment, struggling to organize her emotions. She knew she cared for him. She knew she wanted a future. But the storm inside her was impossible to hide. "I just need a moment," she murmured, avoiding his gaze. He nodded gently, but the insecurity in his eyes was impossible to miss. The news of Jamie's confession had already reached him, and it lingered like a shadow no celebration could escape. Meanwhile, Dakota stepped away again, unable to ignore the weight in her chest. She remembered the years she and Jamie spent together, building trust, creating magic on screen, sharing vulnerabilities that actors rarely exposed to each other. There had always been something between them, something neither of them dared to name. Something that, now more than ever, felt painfully real. Hours later, Dakota returned home and sat in the dark, scrolling through her phone until she reached the interview clip again. She watched Jamie's face carefully, the way his eyes softened, the tremble in his voice, the unmistakable pain behind his confession. When the clip ended, she set the phone down and covered her face with both hands, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. A close friend who visited her the next morning said Dakota looked heartbroken, conflicted, and lost. She couldn't stop asking the same question, "Why now? Why after I finally moved on?" The friend didn't have an answer, but she held Dakota's hand and let her cry. Jamie, on the other side of the city, stepped out into the morning sunlight with heavy eyes and a heavier heart. Paparazzi cameras clicked instantly, capturing his drained expression as he avoided every question shouted at him. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He simply walked with the posture of a man carrying a truth too heavy to undo. Hollywood insiders claimed Jamie attempted to send Dakota a private message that morning. Something short, something simple, something he should have said years ago. But Dakota never replied, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know what to say. Social media erupted once again when Dakota finally posted a short message on Instagram. Timing decides who stays, not feelings. Fans cried. Comment sections exploded. The world felt the weight of a love story that had never had a chance to begin. One that hurt more now that it surfaced too late. Jamie saw the post. Witnesses said he closed his eyes for several seconds, shoulders falling, before whispering to himself, "I know." And so, Hollywood was left with a question that had no easy answer. Can love still matter when it arrives after everything else has already been decided?